In this video, I'm going to look at the Caranavamsa Antardasas in the chart of TJ, the cyclist, whose chart we looked at his Maharaja already. And when we looked at his Caranavamsa Maharaja, we saw that self factors, which are the key things in Caranavamsa Dasha, were activated in Pisces Dasha in 8 out of the 16 Vargas. So that means a huge time in life for finding his path and determining what his path was. Even though at that time he was running Pisces Dasha, it was from the age of 10 to 13. But still, with that much emphasis, and we studied those Pisces periods in the previous video on his Caranavamsa Dasha, those Pisces periods were all so good that, he basically found his career between the age of 10 and 13. Breaking it down more, we can go look at the Antardasas and get some more specifics and details, especially with respect to timing. So when we look at the sub-periods, there's always going to be 3 important types of sub-periods. Okay, there's going to be the sub-periods that have the same agenda as the dasha, as the Mahadasha. So in Caranavamsa, the main agenda is always a self factor. The Lagna Lord, the Atmakaraka, the ruler of the Lagna Lord, the ruler of the Atmakaraka, or the Sun, the ruler of the Sun, or the Pada, the first Pada. Okay? Any sub-periods that have that in common with the main period are going to indicate important times of that thing happening in a person's life. In Caranavamsa, that means you're identifying in a new way with what their path and goals in life are. Okay. In the Pisces Dasha, he was running the Pada in the Show Dump Sha, the 16th Varga, so his life revolved around Show Dump Sha things. One of those is vehicles. Now, Show Dump Sha can also mean other things. It's also the chart of happiness. It's a chart of developing inner happiness so that no matter what happens, we feel comfortable along the road of life. But on a very practical, mundane level, it has to do with vehicles. And for him, it was so, especially since Venus was Rashi aspecting the, the Pada at that time. All right, so the 3 types of important periods. Okay, so there's a time where there's the same agenda. The Antardasha has the same agenda as the Mahadasha. Then there's the time when they go to the outside of, they step through the doorway of the Dasha and they go to the outside. So the Dwara and Baya Rashis. That's going to be important transitional times. And that, in respect to Caranavamsa Dasha, means a transition in the direction their life is taking. And that can mean a transition into a better place or worse of a place, depending what's going on. Or if there's a lot of malefics in those Dwara and Baya Rashis, a person can get bondage according to Jaimini, which means their path gets stuck and they're not able to move forward in their path and towards their goals. Okay? And then the final thing we have to look for is the sub-periods of the signs that have planets in them, that Rashi aspect the Dasha. Okay, so that's really easy to see. Pisces is the Dasha. Sagittarius, Virgo, and Gemini all have planets, and those planets are all Rashi aspecting Pisces. So the Antardashas of those 3 signs are all going to have an influencing factor on the success of Pisces. Okay? The most important of those 3 will be the sub-period of Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is holding Mercury, which gives it the second source of strength. And that second source of strength is what manifests the Rashi, which has the capability of giving that Rashi. And that's why you want to look at that one, look towards that as being a really important one always. Okay? So in TJ's chart, Pisces Dasha started in Pisces Sagittarius. That's the first part of Pisces Dasha in the Caranavamsa, is Pisces Sagittarius. And Sagittarius holds Mercury, and that's causing the second source of strength onto Pisces. So Pisces manifests for him during that time in the Show Dump Sha, and since it has the Pada, it manifests as him as identifying with his bike, making cycling his bikes a part of his life. So at that point, he got seriously into writing, even though he was only a 10-year-old kid at the time. He had just turned 10. Okay? The other periods that influence Pisces, Pisces Gemini, and Pisces Virgo are not going to be as important all in all, okay, because they don't hold the second source of strength. But Pisces Gemini can be fulfilling and happy. Pisces Virgo can be challenging and, cause him to exert more will because he's really hungry for it. And between those two, it makes Pisces fulfilling because Mars gives the work. Pisces gives the fulfillment. That's better because he had to work for it with this Mars. Okay? But of those three Antardasas of planets that influence Pisces, Sag is most important. And that's actually when he got into the cycling itself. Okay? Of those three, the next one to come was Pisces Gemini. Pisces Gemini was very satisfactory to him because he had a lot of fulfillment in cycling, did really well in bike races at that time, saw himself, easily, just naturally get better. It was the time in his life where he was in that place still where every month you get dramatically better, and that especially happened so at that time. So a lot of improvement in strength. Venus, when it comes to athletes, of course, represents their strength. Okay? Mars is important for giving that competitive mentality, but just physical strength actually comes from Venus, as I've talked about in many, many places. Okay? And then Pisces Virgo, as the sub-period with Mars will always be, Pisces Virgo was a little frustrating, where he was hungry. And the reason was because that was a long, cold winter, middle of the winter, where he couldn't get out and exert himself, so Mars was really restless during that time. But it didn't have a negative impact because, again, it's just Mars. It's not, it's not a big deal. It's not a separating factor and so on. But what he did do to kind of keep that competitive desire going, or to burn that fire and hunger, he started doing cyclocross during that winter. And cyclocross is basically a winter form of cycling where people go around and around like a half-mile loop where they have snow and mud and all kinds of stuff. And they just use their normal road bikes with some knobby tires on them. So he got involved in the cyclocross in that time. Okay, so that was, again, Mars, that hunger to want to keep active and trying to find a way, doing what they could do. But the most important period was Sagittarius, when he got into road racing. He wasn't a cyclocross racer. He wasn't he's not known as a big cyclocross racer. He had some small successes, but his whole focus was road racing, which started under Pisces Mercury, or Pisces Sagittarius. Okay? Then the other important periods are always going to be the periods when there's a mutual agenda of the Antardasha Lord. What are those mutual agendas going to be? Well, that's the Antardashas of the Lagna, the Sun, the Lagna Lord, the Lord of the Lagna Lord, or the Lord of the Sun, the dispositor, okay, and the Atmakarika and the ruler of the Atmakarika, okay. In that case, that's going to leave us with three Rashis here. One Rashi is that of Cancer, which holds the Sun and Cancer, two self factors. The other will be of Scorpio, which is holding the Atmakarika moon. And the other one will be of Mars, or Virgo, which is ruling the Atmakarika and ruling the Lagna Lord. So Pisces Virgo is not only getting the influence of Mars, but then Virgo itself is activating a self-identification with vehicles. And as a result, he got identified with cyclocross. Now, Mars, the sign is pretty good. It's Rashi aspected by Mercury, gives the first source of strength, and by Venus as well. But it's not as important as Pisces. Pisces got him into road racing. He got into cyclocross under Pisces Virgo. He dabbled with that for a few years as a winter sport, but he didn't make his name in it. He didn't fully identify with that. The reason being because both Pisces and Virgo, they all have the same influences on them. They're all influenced by Mercury, Mars, and Venus. But Pisces is the Pada. And the Pada is a really, really important self factor because it's what At the end of it all, it's what you are. The Lagna is, you know, what you are. The Lagna Lord is, the Lagna is what you are, is what you're born with, your abilities and skills. The Lagna Lord is how you, we can say, work with them, but what you are ultimately going to become is the Pada. It's a really, really important self-factor, okay? And that's up here in Pisces. So what he got into in Pisces was going to be more important than what he got into under Mars, under Virgo, which held Mars, who was just the ruler of the Atmakarka. Not even the Atmakarka itself. It was a secondary planet in importance. Okay? So the road racing that he got into in the beginning of Pisces and Pisces Sag was better. In addition to the fact that Pisces Sag holds Mercury, who's given that first source of strength to Pisces, whereas Pisces Virgo is giving Virgo is not giving first source of strength to Pisces or to Virgo itself. If Mercury had been in Virgo, it would have been a different matter. Then things that happened in Virgo would have been more important than they were. But they were only of minor importance. But good, okay? And he did actually go on to do well in cyclocross as a junior, but he never kept it as a serious thing. Okay, he got he won the national cyclocross twice as a kid, but then he left it and continued on to other things. But this is when he got into identifying in that, okay? But he never went to the world championships in cyclocross or anything like that, which he's all done on the road bike. Then the other important period is going to be Pisces Cancer. Pisces Cancer is holding the Sun, which is a self-factor, and the Lagna, two self-factors. So this is strong identification with vehicles. Cancer gets the first source of strength from its Lord, the Moon, who's also a benefic, waxing moon. The blemish to it, though, is Rahu here. Rahu is going to cause a blemish there and make things that manifest, because things will manifest during this time because the Moon is giving the Sun in Cancer the first source of strength. So something's going to manifest. But whatever it is that manifests is going to have its illusionary qualities, which means it's going to seem better somehow than it is. Well, what happened for him in Pisces Cancer is he went to nationals for the first time as a 12-year-old, and he won all 3 national championships in his age group. At that time, the age group was 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. He was 12, so he was at the higher end of that age group. Okay, his racing age was 12, which is different than your birth age. But anyway, his racing age was 12. He was at the higher end of his of the field as far as age, and that race is almost always won by a 12-year-old. And in his case, he won all 3, and he won them all really pretty effortlessly. He just totally went and dominated at nationals that year, and that let this Rahu think, wow, this cycling stuff is really working easily for me, which was not how it is. Remember, whatever happens when Rahu's involved, things are not what they seem. Okay? Now, the other, but still, that caused him to identify as a cyclist very strongly, but as a cyclist who was going to be able to dominate really easily, which turned out to be false. And that's due to this Rahu. Okay? Rahu gave him unrealistic expectations in how he was going to be in respect to cycling. The other important time that has a important self factor is Scorpio. So Pisces Scorpio. The Moon is there. It's the Atmakaraka. Now, unfortunately, the Moon is influenced by debilitated Jupiter, which is not going to help it. Okay, debilitated planets actually tend to be harmful. Saturn is Rashi aspecting too from its own sign, so he's not going to be a harmful guy really. The Sun, a separating factor, is Rashi aspecting, and so is Rahu. And Saturn's an own sign. He's 50-50, so he's partially separating. But this sign here is not really good. It doesn't have any first source of strength. That's the first thing. Whenever you see a sign that can give birth to something, which means it has the same agenda as the Dasha Lord, as the Mahadasha sign, if there's no first source of strength to that sign, it can't really do a whole lot of good. Okay, so this sign, Scorpio, doesn't have any first source of strength. Jupiter, which could give it first source of strength, is debilitated, so it's not going to give any strength. So there's really just separating Sun, just a slightly separating Saturn, and then a Rahu, which is going to make things not happen the way expected. So in Pisces Scorpio, he goes over to Nationals the next year as a 13-year-old, racing in the 13-14-year-old division, with expectations that he's going to do really well. It's going to be as easy for him as it was last year, okay, the previous year. But instead, what happened, he went to Nationals and didn't win a single race that year. So he came home with no medals at all that year. No gold medals, not even a bronze medal, nothing. There was no second source of strength. He was moving up into a higher, more difficult category. Now, if he hadn't have been racing a higher category, he wouldn't have needed the second source of strength to get a medal, because he'd already gotten one in that category. But to move up into a higher category and to be racing from the lower ages of that category, to do well there, he was going to have some second source of strength. But he didn't. And so he had the Rahu disappointment and started questioning his whole identification as a cyclist. And this was a tough year as a result, especially because Pisces is the ninth from the ascendant, and the ninth from Pisces is Scorpio. Okay? So he's also in the Dvaya Pisces Rashi and Bhaya outside Rashi. So he's in the doorway and the outside Rashi. So this is the important transitionary time for him. Okay? In the Show Dump Sha chart, the most important transitionary time. And he didn't make a very smooth transition into that. He had lots of expectations on himself, and other people had a lot of expectations on him, but he didn't really make that smooth of a transition. Now, the moon at least is a benefit here. Okay? Jupiter's not able to help because he's debilitated. Saturn's not going to hurt the doorway or the outside, the Scorpio Rashi, because Saturn is in its own sign, and malefics in own sign don't hurt it. The Sun is a malefic, and Rahu's a malefic, though. So there's some trouble to this doorway, and that was a frustrating transition. So he actually transitioned into achieving less than his expectations and less than the expectations that have been put upon him. And interesting enough, that's a lot of how his racing career has gone. It's always the times when the greatest expectations are on him, where he thinks he's going to do the best, that he usually doesn't do as good as he, hopes to. And basically, because of this difficult doorway in this 16th Varga, as a cyclist, he's not done as much as he always felt the promise was there for. Okay? For instance, when he was 23, he got 5th in the Tour de France. There was a lot of great people there. It was amazing that he got 5th. He was 23 in the Tour de France as a young rider still, and you get a special medal for being the highest young rider, which he got that year. Then 2 years later, last year, and 2 years ago, there was a lot of really top cyclists racing in the Tour de France, and he got 5th. In 2014 Tour de France, he was the team leader. His team was backing him to win the Tour de France, whereas 2 years before, he was just a guy on the team who did really good. So this year, all the expectations were on him. Shimano made a special shoe, or Perlizumi, who makes cycling clothing and shoes, had a special TJ edition cycling shoe. So, really getting set up for success. He's the team leader. He ends up 5th. And that's after 3 of the top guys end up dropping out in the beginning of the race, 3 of the favorites that were there 2 years ago because of crashing and who knows what else and sickness. And then 2 young riders, 2 23-year-olds, beat him. 3rd and 4th place was done by 23-year-old young riders, guys who are considered not even mature enough to really do an amazing job at the Tour de France. And so, that's a huge disappointment from the point of view of where he was 2 years before that. And this is a similar thing that happened when he started, cycling. He won these, just dominated at nationals. No expectations were on him. But then the next year he goes back to nationals and he doesn't win a single medal. And that's just the effects of having this important self factor, the Atmakaraka, not in great shape in the 16th Varga. It's something that's really holding him back from making the best out of vehicles. 16th is smoothness, easiness, and difficulties in vehicles. And, in this Tour de France this last year, he had 5 crashes, or 3 or 4 crashes. Just crashed a lot. He had a lot of bad luck. And so did lots of other people. But that's a big part when you get on a bike, is luck. But that's been a theme that regularly happens to him in cycling. He fractured his hip earlier last year. Maybe at some point we'll look at that dasha, but the point I'm making is when your Atmakaraka has some damage to it in a Varga, that Varga is going to cause you some troubles. It's not going to be a Varga that everything's going to fall into place. There's times when it seemed like it would, but when it came right down to it, he sort of had been set up to have expectations that result in disappointment. And that's just been a constant theme throughout his cycling career. Okay? And that theme started, the point I'm making, when he was in that transition of Pisces, Scorpio as a kid, when that first happened to him. Okay? And that afflicted Atmakaraka here, with debilitated Jupiter and that Rahu, is just not a great Atmakaraka in the 16th Varga. So, his identification and, with that thing will get frustrated at times, okay? So that was a difficult transition a bit. Now, fortunately, it wasn't a tragic get-out-of-cycling type because there is a waxy moon, there is a benefic here. But had there been a malefic in this outside sign, there could have been some big problems, some bigger problems. As it was, he just didn't win any medals that year. Okay? Okay, so that's how I would read the Caranavamsa Dasha. Find the important Rashis and look for when they happen. You don't need to go through it one Rashi at a time. First, find the important Rashis and read the story of those important Rashis, and then you're reading the Dasha. And then you just see when those different parts of the story are going to happen. Okay? Now, the Show Dump Sha and the Caranavamsa is going to show when he identifies more heavily and less heavily with vehicles, or more pleasantly and less pleasantly. But by itself, it's not going to be the chart you want to look at for success. It's the chart you want to look at for when he identifies more with vehicles, or more happily with vehicles. He identified very, very happily with vehicles in many respects in Pisces Cancer, though not realistically because of Rahu. He identified as being able to win races easily, which turned out to be a false assumption. He identified with vehicles in a more disappointing way in Pisces Scorpio. But that didn't necessarily, those events didn't necessarily have to happen in the context of bike racing and winning medals or not winning medals. Okay? It could have happened in the context of anything, because the 16th Varga is not the Varga. It's the Varga of vehicles. It's not the Varga of successes. Okay? For that, we have to look at the Dasamsha. So the Dasamsha is going to tell a lot of the story. And if you remember, the Pisces was holding the Pada in the Dasamsha as well. So the chart of great successes, identifying with great success, is going to happen in Pisces, period. Okay? Pisces is holding Rahu, as we've seen. So identifying with great successes won't really be realistic. He had lots of unrealistic expectations due to the easy beginnings at that time. But let's look at some of the other important times. Okay? One of the important times is going to be Pisces Cancer, because it holds the Lagna, right? Another self factor. Pisces Cancer is holding exalted Jupiter, so it gets the first source of strength from Jupiter. Or second source of strength, sorry. It gets another source of strength from this moon, its lord, and a third source of strength from Mercury. So it has all three sources of strength that are available to the second source of strength. It's an awesome Cancer. It does have Mars debilitated. Okay? It does have a Rashi aspect of the Sun. But the sun is, can be a separating factor that can cause us to sacrifice things to follow our inspirations. But since Caranavamsa Dasha is all about going towards our inspirations, the sun influencing a self factor is never going to be a bad thing. So the only problem here we have is debilitated Mars. And in the face of three, second source of strength planets, that's not going to matter much, okay? That's going to cause some little frustrations along the way, but this is a really successful Cancer sign. It was Pisces Cancer that he won 3 gold medals, maybe one for Jupiter, one for the Moon, and one for Mercury, okay, in Pisces Cancer. So really the great success of Pisces Cancer is more revealed in, the Dump Sha than it is in the Show Dump Sha. So that's where we see that great summer of racing, including winning the 3 gold medals, okay. The other important sign is going to be that of Pisces Taurus, because it's holding the Lagna Lord and the Maharaja. Okay? Taurus has the second source of strength on 2 counts due to Mercury and due to Jupiter, who Rashi aspects it. And then it gets boosted by having a Mula Trikona moon. It's a great Taurus. And during that time, he hadn't actually got into, during that time it was where he lived, unfortunately, it was not a time where racing was really happening because it was the middle of the winter, okay? Or, beginning to middle of winter, basically, most of winter. And so, where he lived, grew up in Montana, that, bike racing shuts down during the winter, okay? However, he did show a lot of strength during that time, and people started becoming really impressed with him. So he was locally, as this little, basically 11-year-old, was really starting to push the older riders, where, he'd go riding with people who were older, and they would be, gosh, this person is really a lot faster than they should be at their age. So that's the respect they got during that time. Had there been some active racing during that time, it could have been a different kind of respect. But again, we're dealing with the Caranavamsa Dasha, which is identifying with great success and great abilities. And he did that more so in the Pisces Taurus period, okay? And more so in the Pisces Cancer period, where he was actually allowed to race and do that, okay? Now, the interesting sign in the Dump Sha chart, a really interesting read with a lot of subtle, subtleties of astrological interpretation, was Pisces Scorpio. That was the doorway and the outside in the Dump Sha. That's when he went back and didn't win the medals the next year. In this chart, we don't have Rahu influencing like we did in the Show Dump Sha. Rather, Scorpio is influenced by exalted Jupiter, his debilitated Lord, and Venus. Okay? Now, Venus is the benefic which could smooth that transition. Jupiter is going to smooth that transition. Debilitated Mars means there's a lack of fire going on. And that's what ultimately caused the lack of the ability to race, to win the race, the biggest races that year, the nationals that year. It's because Mars was complacent, and influencing his own Rashi. Mars by himself is never complacent, but when you have Venus here, who's making things easy, and then a sleeping Mars, it basically shows he didn't fight hard enough under Pisces Scorpio. Because Venus was, remember how I said Venus alone makes things fulfilling, but then you don't do the work. Mars alone makes you do a lot of work, but then you don't get any fulfillment. Mars and Venus together make you work and get fulfillment, which means you get more fulfillment, okay, or more success. Because Mars is debilitated here during that Scorpio Antardasha, and Scorpio, of course, is ruled by Mars, he just didn't put enough fire into it during that Antardasha, and Venus just had this feeling of, oh yeah, I could take it easy. And Venus made him take it easy, Okay. Now, fortunately, there was still Jupiter there, and he did good races that year. It wasn't like he never won a race, but he didn't win the big ones. And a lot of that is simply because this Scorpio sign is simply not as strong as the other signs. So it wasn't going to offer as much success as did the other Antardasas. But the biggest problem is this debilitated Mars, really. Okay, having its Lord, Scorpio having its Lord debilitated. And then not having any other sources of strength to really boost it.